Trump saying on his way over to the G7 that it was kind of possible that he might get involved, but clearly was on the fence, to leaving it early and definitely signalling more clearly that he's going to be taking some sort of role in this. Whether that actually amounts to direct US intervention obviously remains to be seen. But now suggesting perhaps Steve Witkoff, his envoy, key envoy, an extremely close ally and friend, could well go out there, or indeed his vice president. So we'll have to see where that gets to. He said plainly that he doesn't think that Iran can get the bomb. This is something which really divides the MAGA camp in a very significant way. It's not something that he could do without having a significant amount of opposition from some people in his own camp. People like Tucker Carlson, for example, Charlie Kirk, Marjorie Taylor Greene, these real stalwarts of his who are actually extremely anti any intervention. And I think Trump using this in some way to kind of define what America First actually means and whether or not that does exclude any intervention.
Let's take you back, at least mentally, to everything you've left behind. Because Donald Trump left the G7 meeting in Canada early last night. The French President Emmanuel Macron said Trump had left to work on securing a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, but the US president later posted on Truth Social saying Macron was publicity seeking and his departure had nothing to do with the ceasefire. He's now spoken to reporters on Air Force One. Here's what he said.
Looking at better than a ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're looking for better than a ceasefire.
Well, in case you struggled to hear that, that's Donald Trump saying the US is looking for something better than a ceasefire in the war between Iran and Israel. Lara, what's better than a ceasefire?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, clearly somebody is alluding to the fact that Israel will be, I think, quite keen to see the US involved in this in some way. There's obviously talk about these bunker busting bombs, which many people think are completely necessary if you're actually going to be capable of taking out fully the uranium enrichment capacity of Iran. So I think in the last 24 hours, we've moved from Trump saying on his way over to the G7 that it was kind of possible that he might get involved, but clearly was on the fence, to leaving it early and definitely signalling more clearly that he's going to be taking some sort of role in this. Whether that actually amounts to direct US intervention obviously remains to be seen. But now suggesting perhaps Steve Witkoff, his envoy, key envoy, an extremely close ally and friend, could well go out there, or indeed his vice president. So we'll have to see where that gets to. He said plainly that he doesn't think that Iran can get the bomb. This is something which really divides the MAGA camp in a very significant way. It's not something that he could do without having a significant amount of opposition from some people in his own camp. People like Tucker Carlson, for example, Charlie Kirk, Marjorie Taylor Greene, these real stalwarts of his who are actually extremely anti any intervention. And I think Trump using this in some way to kind of define what America First actually means and whether or not that does exclude any intervention. But leaving the G7, we should say, big loss for people like Zelensky, who was set to have a bilateral meeting with him. Big loss too for some of those like the leader of Mexico, but also other countries who weren't in the G7 but had been invited, who were hoping to have some sort of breakthrough on the question of tariffs, which, while not explicitly mentioned, was certainly high on the agenda. So his early departure, while it could definitely be significant for what happens in the Middle East, certainly also significant for conflicts elsewhere.
Look, I'm obviously not asking you, Lara, to see into his brain, but you have to ask what's happened to him? Because the idea of Donald Trump's foreign policy, it was statedly anti-intervention. Then America First meant it was against big plans of regime change. Trump has had any consistency at all, he's been against the forever war, the American military involvement in places that are not, strictly speaking, America's problem. This is just a sort of complete reversal of that. And I'm wondering, does this evolve out of his previous philosophy, or is this just a complete contradiction of it?
Well, there's two things there. The first is that, he might make the case that this is a significant opportunity, perhaps the opportunity, to really get rid of Iran's nuclear capacity.
But that's what they said about Iraq and Saddam Hussein.
But Israel has moved before the US. He was very clear to make it. He was very clear that he did not have anything to do with that initial movement. They've now moved. Could be seen as opportunity. Fine. Secondly, I think others might say, actually, that idea that he has always been resolutely anti-intervention is actually not necessarily true. There's some flexibility there. I mean, look at what he's saying about Greenland, for example. This is not someone for whom consistency has been made massively his greatest virtue, and actually that's to his credit in some respects, politically speaking, that it's allowed him some flexibility. And it's not a particularly original point to say that the normal rules of political engagement or theory don't necessarily always apply to him.
James, you're a keen observer of what's going on in the MAGA sphere, particularly in its sort of like podcast and social media angle. You do think that, like, generally speaking, if there was a Democrat president who was talking about getting involved in a war against Iran, even on the side of Israel, an awful lot of the MAGA sphere would be very, very upset about that.
Yeah, of course. And it's a lot to do with the difference between sitting in opposition, shouting into a microphone in a podcast about what the government should be doing, and actually the reality of being governing. I guess part of the irony of the position Trump finds himself in is that the world might not be as conflict-ridden were he not president. People have taken the opportunity of a Trump presidency to understand that the old liberal order, which was just about pinned in place by, previous Democratic presidents, was open to be jabbed at and shaken up a little bit. And it's precisely because Trump, the president who wanted America to be anti-interventionist, is now president, that the world is a dangerous and more unstable place. I guess in terms of that element of hypocrisy, I think there is a kind of theme running through Trump's foreign policy, which is a kind of sense of American pride and a more proper, and, America's desire to be isolationist is kind of this desire to have a strong country that is separate and has a sense of dignity in itself. But I think that is also the same kind of emotion that informs this feeling that America shouldn't be taken advantage of and, should, if it's called on, be able to kind of stand up for itself. So I think there is a kind of weird theme incoherently underlying that.
But what's so fascinating about that, and I'm aware that we're drifting into the sort of psychoanalyzing Donald Trump territory, which is where conversations about Donald Trump always regrettably end up. Nonetheless, he's got this sort of keen idea of American national pride, but he doesn't seem to recognize even the concept of other nations having national pride. So, pretty much more or less while we're speaking, he's basically saying that all that Iran has to do is completely give up its nuclear ambitions. Basically, he's calling for complete surrender on part of Tehran. He doesn't seem to sort of understand that for Iranian politicians that's hard to do, that there are other considerations, that they can't even, certainly not as a tyrannical regime, go back to their public as a sort of defeated people. He doesn't seem to understand that Russia has national pride, that Ukraine has national pride. Lara, it's really weird.
I think, in the case of Russia, he kind of does get it, which is what makes it perhaps slightly strange. That I think certainly for other examples you might say he doesn't. But even the comments about Putin being excluded from the G8, for example, do indicate that this is somebody who does understand the Putin psyche in some respects. He is, if you look at people on the West who have had direct engagement with Putin in recent months, he'd be high up there, right? He spent hours on the phone to Putin and clearly feels like he has some sort of relationship with him and can understand it. And that is one of the things that people often say is that, he sees in himself this sense of what it means to be a leader who is proud of his country. And I do agree with James in that respect. That is certainly a kind of common thread that runs through his foreign policy.
Yeah, it's very odd. Well, obviously we're going to be keeping across that later as well.